All right. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning for some of you as well. My name's Stuart Finn from the University of Queensland. Welcome to our second, let's call it, webinar workshop for this year for the Earth Observation for Government network, which is going to be on land use and land cover applications. Before I do start us off today, I do want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land and waters and air on which we meet, and just acknowledge their elders past and present, and as well as the current and emerging generations and leaders therein. I'd also like to thank Larissa Marfan from the Earth Observation Australia office for helping us get this all set up, and also everybody for tuning into this at relatively short notice as well. Right, so the aim of today is essentially to follow on from activities that we had started last year, looking at how we better link what's happening in sort of research and development areas in our universities, research institutions, through to government-based delivery of products and services in a range of areas. We did run a major multi-day workshop in August last year in Canberra, which a number of you contributed to face-to-face and also in a report. And that process helped us identify a number of key products and services which we needed to look at in more detail to help government agencies develop and deliver these over time, and also again to link more effectively across that research to operational pathway. One of those priority areas was land use and land cover, and that's what we're going to look at over the next couple of days. I do want to acknowledge Geoscience Australia, particularly the Digital Earth Australia program, particularly Alan Matlenko, in terms of setting this up and getting it going initially, as well as Norman Mueller for his help, and also Alexis McIntyre for getting this going as well. So that's the background in terms of where we're actually coming from. So hopefully you can all see the screen at the moment. So just in terms of the logistics for these three sessions which we're going to run through, typically we'll do some talking and briefing of key points to consider, and then go into some more focused work which will either be a discussion between people online or entry of information based on your thoughts, your organisation, into some online forms, which will then collect to help move the process forward. So what we would ask is that everyone keeps your microphones on mute until we have a discussion session, and also keep your cameras off as well. If you do have questions as we're going along, please feel free to raise your hand using the raise your hand symbol, or type something into the chat window, and I'll either stop or Larissa will have a look at it as well, and we can respond to the question. I do want to advise everyone that we are recording this, so it can be a resource that's used later on, and we can come back and check. And that will be the audio, the video, what's shared on the screen, and also what's in the chat window as well is recorded. So all of that is there. So that's sort of the bigger picture background. If you look at what's up on the screen at the moment, the aim of the next three sessions is really to look at land cover and land use applications, and how we transition from sort of research ready, research proven, through to operational activities for use at a national level and also at a state and territory level as well. And we'll just go around the room briefly in a minute for introductions. In saying that, I do want to acknowledge that there's already been an extensive amount of collaboration and coordination across the land use mapping and land cover mapping space between states and territories to a Commonwealth level, particularly in the Australian Collaborative Land Use Mapping Program. So we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We do want to recognise what's there already and build on that. So our starting point for what we're doing today is all of the work that's gone beforehand, and we tried to capture as much of that as possible in that workshop and reports last year. There were essentially 5 priority areas we identified: vegetation, land cover and land use, water, topography, and fire. So 2 weeks ago, we had the workshops for looking at vegetation products and services, and that was a good learning experience, and we're hoping to apply some of that to this week's workshop. So land cover and land use is the second priority area. Prior to last year, there was a test workshop done the year before looking at mangrove products and services, and that was something which Leo Limburner and Richard Lucas, who I think is online today, and a number of you also participated in, and that was putting together research sort of ready applications to delivering them nationally so people could use that for a range of activities. So we're slowly getting towards doing this on a regular basis. So in between that workshop that we had in August last year, we were intending to start face-to-face workshops for these priority areas in February and March this year, but for a range of reasons across bushfires as well as the current COVID situation, we moved it to an online exercise. And to help support that, we ran an initial survey, which we didn't get a lot of responses for, about what people considered their current sort of unmet needs were in terms of land cover and land use mapping, what was working, what wasn't, and what could be improved upon. And we'll use some of that information in the workshop. So the aim of the workshop at the moment is really 3 sessions. The first one is looking at the process as a whole, and then what are the, products that are quite close and could be moved from a research proven or just an individual state and territory application to something that could run at a Commonwealth level. So the idea of today is identifying priority products for transition. Part of that, and this came out of our discussions in the first workshops on vegetation products and services, is there are some potential barriers or issues that sit across research, government, and also industry that either delivers or uses these products and services that we need to consider. And we'll bring those points up in the discussion today. So today is really about, what are some of those key priority areas to move forward to that sort of operational side of things. The second workshop tomorrow, we'll look at what's the process that would actually be involved for taking some of these research proven activities and putting them together, at state and territory level or at a Commonwealth level as well, in terms of making the delivery work. And part of that is the transition planning box that you can see at the end. And then the final session, which is next week, we shifted it forward because of public holidays and other things, is, okay, at the research end of things, what's happening in land use and land cover, what are the activities we need to be aware of and start to put into, our research agencies focusing on the research infrastructure being used to develop these nationally with the intent of moving them to operational products in the longer term as well. I do want to be clear, as we were with vegetation, that this isn't about reinventing the wheel. There's a lot of work already going on in these areas. It's really trying to find those critical components that we can move forward into operational, but also to enable all of our research resources, as well as parts of industry, to be utilised more effectively in this process. So the output from these workshops are what we're calling transition plans, which is documents that would outline how we transition those research-ready activities to operational, and then what become our more sort of higher priority research activities as well. So, sorry, I just got to bring up the chat window to check on that. Okay. There's a question from Matt Miles about contributions to the survey. Matt, the questions that we are asking here are going to be sort of a follow-up on that, so that's a good point as well. What we might do now is I just want to briefly run around the group so we get a sense of who's actually here and the agency that you work for. So I might just identify people and just get you to introduce your name and who you work for. If we can keep it really brief, because we don't have too much time today, that would be great. So I might start quite quickly with John Lays.
Yep. Okay, yeah, my name's John Lees. I work for the Department of Planning, Industry and Environment in New South Wales. And I come to this group because I'm really interested in fractional ground cover, because we use it for all our dust watch and water erosion and wind erosion monitoring, as well as I do have an interest in SEER, although I've been moved away from that of late.
Thanks, John. All right, Jane Stewart.
Hello, Jane Stewart from the Department of Agriculture, Water and the Environment. I'm in ABARES and I lead the Forest and Land Sciences program, and also have a coordinating role for the Australian Collaborative Land Use and Management program.
Cool. Thanks, Jane. Richard Lucas.
Hi, yes, good to see you all. Richard Lucas from Aberystwyth University, and I've been working on all sorts of things, as you know, in Australia, on mangroves and land use and land cover recently as well.
And thanks for joining us, Richard. I know it's insanely early in the morning, your time. So, Juan Gershman.
Juan Gershman from CSIRO Land and Water in Canberra. Thanks.
Cool. Thanks, Juan. Lucy Randall.
Lucy Randall from ABARES, working with Jane in the Forest and Land Sciences, and involved in the land use mapping for many years.
Cool. Thanks, Lucy. Norman Mueller.
Hi, it's Norman Mueller, Director of Product Development for Digital Earth Australia and leading the Digital Earth Australia land cover team.
Cool. Thanks, Norman. Staying in GA, Alan Metlenko.
I'll just need to unmute. Hi everyone, Alan Metlenko from Geoscience Australia. Stuart, thanks for your introduction. My interest in EOGN is formed some time ago. It's lovely to see it evolved into an effective network, and it's lovely to see some old and new names, so welcome.
Thanks, Ella. All right, Angelica Suarez.
Hi, I'm Angelica from University of New England, working with the Applied Agricultural Remote Sensing Center in Armidale. I'm just very interested to know what is going on in this at this level. Thank you.
Thanks, Angelica. James Brinkoff.
Yeah, I'm from the same team. I've done a little bit of work with automated land cover classification of tree crops in New South Wales. Yep, good to be here.
Cool. Thanks, James. And where are we? Celine Steinfeld. I just I don't know where Celine's gone. I was just on a meeting with Celine, so hopefully she'll join us again. Grant Staben.
Yeah, g'day. I'm with the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, Northern Territory Government, and I've worked with land use mapping and land cover.
Cool. Thanks, Grant. Joel McKechnie.
Hi everyone, I'm in the same team as James and Angelica at UNE and currently mapping horticulture around Australia, previously mapping land use at a state level in Queensland.
Cool. Thanks, Joel. Dan Tyndall.
Thanks, Stuart. Hi everyone, Dan Tyndall here, Science Leader at the Remote Sensing Centre in Queensland Department of Environment and Science, and Steering Committee member in the Joint Remote Sensing Research Program. I think I know a fair few of you, but I've had various involvement managing land cover, land use programs over many years, and continue to, including SLATs, ground cover program, that sort of thing.
Thanks, Dan. Stay in Queensland and go to Phil Norman.
Hi everyone, Phil Norman. I'm with Dan in the Department of Environment and Science Remote Sensing Centre, and I'm managing the land use mapping program at the moment.
Cool, thanks Phil. Matt Miles.
Thanks Stuart. Hi everyone, Matt Miles. I'm in the Science Information Technology branch, South Australian Department for Environment and Water. I've been involved in the ACLUMP program for many years now, focusing on these kinds of products, land use and land cover. And also there are a number of NCLUMI or ACLUMP people around the table here, but I'm trying to be a conduit back into that broader group with these topics in a two-way sense. Thanks.
Thanks, Matt. All right, Celine, just checking you're back on now.
Yeah, sorry, I dropped out.
That's all right.
I'm Celine Steinfeld. I'm from the Wentworth Group of Concerned Scientists. We've got a strong interest in the environmental accounting and Earth observation, and I also sit on the scientific advisory panel to the Common National Accounts Program.
Thanks, Celine. And Ali, I can't see your last name there.
Ali Cowood. I work in the Environmental Economic Accounts section in the Department of Agriculture, Water and the Environment.
Excellent. Thanks, Ali. And Sue.
Yeah, hi, Sue Ray. I'm with Department of Planning, Industry and Environment in New South Wales. I help out with a lot of the products that the remote sensing guys work on and the land use. I was hoping Stu Smith, who's in charge of our land use program, could join us, but he's unable to today. And unfortunately, I have to drop out at 3:30, but I'll be back on tomorrow.
No worries. Thanks very much, Sue. And I think that actually does raise an important point before we finish off. This is recorded, and also the survey that we are going to use and the materials that can be accessed offline. So if you feel there are people in your organisation or others that you know could contribute to this, please feel free to let them know about it as well.
So will that be sent to us? We'll get a link to that after the meeting?
Yeah, I was just looking at the agenda that you've got there, I think has a link to the previous report. Okay. I think, Larissa, just checking, were we going to send people a link to the folder, or are we going to give them links to individual documents and other activities?
I was going to post links to individual documents, but I can send that through to everyone by email after the meeting as well.
Yeah, okay, cool. I think that might help as well. And actually, Larissa, while I'm there, do you want to introduce yourself?
Good afternoon, Larissa Marfan, sit within Earth Observation at the University of Queensland.
Cool, thanks, Larissa. And two other people, so Albert Van Dyke.
Hello, Albert Van Dyke, Australian National University, both with and currently again at, which is also nice.
Thanks, Albert. And then there was one more person on the phone, and I'm sorry I can't see your name.
And Stuart, it's Kristen here.
Oh,
as
it's Kristen.
well.
Hi, Kristen. Sorry, I didn't see your name till then. Right. Sorry. I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, Kristen Williams. I'm in CSIRO Land and Water based in Canberra. Presently leading the Living Landscapes Research Program, and from 1st of July I'll be handing over that role to Libby Pinkard. I wanted to let everyone know that I will be the lead author for the land theme from for the 2021 National State of the Environment Report. And so if you think that I might not be aware of the products that you are developing that might be relevant to the land indicators, then please get in touch with me, kristen.williams@csiro.au.
Actually, Kristen, Larissa and I might follow up with you afterwards about that, so we can.
Great, thank you.
Cool. And I think Karen Holmes was the only other person. I know there was two other people. Karen, did you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, Karen Holmes from Perth in the Department of Primary Industries and Regional Development. I'm really sitting in for our ACLUMP representative, but I'm also keen on use of all kinds of imagery products for resource management.
Cool. Okay, thanks, Karen. And Lindsay, sorry, I forgot to.
Hi everyone, Lindsay Mitchell here. I'm with the Department of Primary Industries, Parks, Water and Environment in Tasmania, in the Natural Values branch, and we do have some ACLUMP reps in our group, but I'm sitting in for them today.
All right, thanks, Lindsay. Let's see, have I missed anyone? I think I've got everyone. Cool. All right, thanks for taking the time to do those introductions. It is important because the groups that we run through these do sit across universities, research institutions, NGOs, state and territory governments, and Commonwealth agencies. So it's a good mix, but it's that right mix of people that we want to have. What I wanted to do, just to set the context for a series of questions that we want to get people thinking about and then discussing. So I just want to go back to the PowerPoint presentation. All right. And just to show in a graphic context what it is we're trying to do. A number of you have seen this already. I apologise for that. But if you have a look on the top line of that diagram or table, it's in red text saying technical readiness levels going from research to research proven to operational, and then operational at a national level. What we're trying to do with Earth Observation for Government Network is to make those links between sort of the research proven to operational, whether it's state and territory and at a national level. The text in blue indicates the bodies which are notionally, well not notionally, which are occupying each of those spaces. I was reminded at the other meeting to briefly explain research infrastructure as well. And that we do have a national program which funds collaborative research infrastructure across universities and research institutions, and particularly in the environmental space. We have the Terrestrial Ecosystem Research Network, or TERN, the Integrated Marine Observing System. We also have AuScope, which is more to do with solid Earth environments. Digital Earth Australia isn't quite a piece of NCRIS capability, even though some of it runs on research infrastructure. It is a Commonwealth government component. And then the research proven to operational, you've got a cooperative research centre in there which goes through to industry, but we've got different government agencies as well as Digital Earth Australia linking all the way up. One of the reasons for showing this diagram is the term operational means different things to different organisations, and we're not adopting just one definition of that. I'll come back to that in a minute. And then the other term which came up last time was what are authoritative data sets as well. The reason for mentioning that is I think a lot of you are aware we have moved into a time period where there will be multiple versions of different products. Could be land cover products if you want. It could be vegetation fractional cover products. There are multiple versions of these products out there, and the processes that produce them could be operational, and that they're producing them 24/7, 365 days a year, and they're validated, but which is the one which is fit for specific use, or which is authoritative, does differ between organisations, and that point came up last week as well. So just hop out of that particular screen at the moment and jump back into, okay. So we do have an outline and a run sheet for an area, which we'll let everybody see. Essentially what we're doing for the rest of today was working through a number of questions and then a discussion around points of clarification or key points that need to be brought up around a number of key questions. So we'll give you a link to this particular form in here, and what we're looking for in this, we'll give you the link to the actual questions, so yours will look a bit more like this, is just looking at the questions which are there. You don't have to answer all of these questions. It can be the most relevant ones to you. And if there's any that you think you need clarification, let us know. So what we're trying to do today is work through here and start to filter towards, what are those products or services in land cover or land use, which, are at that sort of, they're research proven and could be sort of moved into an operational level. I know different states and territories are doing or conducting different land use mapping approaches, some of which are focused on specific crops. We've got different land cover mapping activities. You can focus on land cover if you want, so different thematic categories of what's on the surface of the land, or land use if that's the area that you're more interested in, particularly in relation to the ACLUMP processes that go on. But what we are interested in is, what do you think actually needs to be improved with what you currently have if you're using it? Are there any uses or requirements for land use or land cover mapping which are not being met at the moment? And that could be in terms of the area that's covered, it could be the level of spatial detail, it could be the level of information detail, like in crop mapping, it could be, is it down to the commodity level that you want? Is it how often it's delivered? So, are there specific improvements with land cover and land use products that your organisation needs, but which aren't there at the moment? It can be land cover or land use. It's just desirable elements of those new products. And then, do you know of any products which are either at a state and territory level or in a research infrastructure sort of delivery mode, which ideally should be shifted into something like Digital Earth Australia or another active mapping program? And then we get into the question about what's authoritative. So who actually defines those standards? I think for land use, yes, we do have ACLUMP there, but is that what happens for land cover? the last full question is really about calibration validation in terms of checking the validity of maps. You know, is that something that government agencies, state, territory and national need to do more of? But is it something that we could involve industry and research in doing as well? And then the last question is about comments about the workshop there. So essentially what we're looking at for the rest of today is starting to get people thinking about those questions and even answering them. You might be able to take them away afterwards and fill them out. There might be other people in your organisation that also could potentially fill these out as well. So it's the aim, I guess, over the next sort of 20 to 25 minutes is to go through that. But before we do that, I guess I'm giving you the EOGN perspective on this, which is sitting outside what's happening with land cover and land use to a certain extent. I might ask if Jane Stewart, if you're able just to give us some input on, you know, what's actually sort of happening at this level in terms of your awareness of that activities in the area. And after that, I did want to ask Norman Mueller to also comment briefly on the DEA interest in this as well. And Marissa's just posted the link to the questions in the chat link. So Jane, could I just presume upon you for a couple of minutes?
Yep.
To present a little bit of more context to what I've provided.
Can people hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, that's nice and clear. Thanks, Jane.
So I suppose the Australian Collaborative Land Use and Mapping Program, or Australian Collaborative Land Use and Management Program, I better get it right, has been around for coming up to 20 years. It came out of the demand for having nationally consistent land use information and also a recognition of the desire to have that for land cover and land management practices. I suppose Earth observation data has been a key input into producing land use mapping products, part of the desktop assessment of land use, and then also I suppose then there's been the field validation that's gone with that. I suppose in terms of where we would like to be going, we would be envisaging that land cover would be a product that could inform where change has occurred in land use to focus where we would update our land use mapping. I mean, I suppose that traditionally our land use mapping had been more of an intensive operation in the field, and as resources have got tighter, there's been more of a focus of doing that in a more automated sense, either using existing spatial data sets and then just focusing on smaller areas where field work would need to happen. Also trialling some new methods around things like machine learning or computer vision to do some more automated land use mapping. And so I suppose the ACLUMP group has been looking at how it can improve its mapping to be more current, because that's been a demand for it to be more current, and also to enable reporting of change that's been identified as well. So I suppose the group at the moment's involved in the environmental economic accounting work that's happening, that's now in the Department of Agriculture, Water and Environment, formerly the Department of Environment and Energy. And so the group's been looking at how it can do reporting of change. We've had our Queensland colleagues that have had extensive experience in doing that in a very thorough way, but how can we apply that in a more national approach that I suppose we can do reasonably effectively. another area that we're, as a group, been looking at is how we can lead to better data harmonisation. As you mentioned, the jurisdictions have slightly different ways in which they do their land use mapping, and that's actually been a strength, really, I think, of the group, that we've been able to accommodate different approaches by having a classification, a standard classification in terms of how we report land use, and allowing to accommodate the differences between the different jurisdictions and how they do their mapping. But I think as we've become more sophisticated, there's a desire to be a little bit more harmonious in how we do that. And I think that's also influenced by the shrinking of resources into land use mapping. So looking at how we can draw on other activities that are going on. I mean, I would say Tasmania have gone down the route of what they call their Land Use Live, where they look at available spatial data sets that enables them to map about 80% or so of the state. And then with engagement with industry, they're able to map some of the agricultural land uses. And actually that's something that our UNE colleagues that are doing the horticulture tree mapping, I mean, that engagement with industry, one to cross-check what the mapping is using the remote sensing or using the Earth observation data, and then also to have the industry have buy-in to the products, and they're creating some of the demand for that product because they have ownership over it. They've had some input into the validation of that product. They're providing inputs to that. So the work that UNE are doing at the moment, where they're focusing on a subset of land uses, horticulture tree crops, which we can see reasonably well through imagery, that's working quite well. And some of the other industries are looking at that, wine industry, for instance, sugarcane, cotton. I suppose there's quite a lot of work in the agricultural side of things. But land use also does cover the whole landscape. So it's how you capture some of those other land uses, and land cover is an informer to that, but land cover is not land use in all cases. Is that enough of an overview, Stuart?
That's extremely helpful, Jane. I mean, there's a couple of key forward-looking points there. Just to dig into that a little bit before I go to Norman, are there any, I mean, you did talk about the horticultural mapping and the agricultural mapping. Are there other land uses which are particularly challenging to map across the different states and territories?
I mean, I think your agriculture is your dynamic. That's where a lot of your change is happening, and I suppose that's and we know that that's tricky, but it also lends itself a bit to the remote sensing application. I mean, you've got your urban expansion, you've got your land use conflict sort of issues going on. Yeah, I mean, I suppose with a lot of the land use, we're using other data sets to inform that. So different jurisdictions will be collecting information on where their vegetation, their native vegetation is. You've got your infrastructure, where your mines, your topographic stuff in terms of water features. So there's a number of other data sets that we draw on, and then we put our classification over the top to then assign the land use.
Okay. Thanks. And then what's the current arrangement in terms of land cover mapping? Is that something that ACLUMP deals with directly, or it's indirectly because it's a feed in your output?
It's traditionally been more indirect, more because there hasn't been necessarily, or there hasn't been a national product. I mean, there was the dynamic land cover product, but now there's the one that Digital Earth Australia is doing currently, and there's interest in that, and I suppose the ACLUMP community is keen to have involvement in assessing that product. A number of the states have their own land cover products, and I suppose under the ACLUMP or NCLUMI umbrella, we would be keen to bring some consistency to our land cover activities. I suppose ACLUMP also has had quite a role in, I suppose, national coordination around the fractional cover products, particularly the validation of that. So I suppose it falls under the umbrella. It really depends at the time on what the focus of the group is. And I suppose now that the land cover product is starting to mature at the national product, I think there is the group would like to have some involvement in that.
Is this a way of, I guess, this process, one way of initiating that?
Well, through the environmental economic accounts, the NCLUMI and ACLUMP have been identified as the group to endorse the national products that are being produced for the land account. So that's land use, land tenure and land cover. So that's where the group will have opportunity to assess the land cover.
Cool. Right, that answers the question. Thanks very much, Jane. That was really helpful, and I appreciate you doing that at short notice. I think that's a good transition over to Norman, just as some more, to give us some more context on where the Digital Earth Australia program is with this, and then I think that'll help us move into filling out or thinking about how to answer those questions. Norman, can I put you on the spot for a bit?
Thanks, Stuart. No worries. So, as many will know, we've been working on land cover for some time. We did the dynamic land cover several years ago, but it never really did what we wanted it to. And one of the things that really brought it home for us was when the ABS said that they were going to do experimental land accounts using our data, and we thought, oh my God, where is this going? So the decision was taken that we needed to come up with something better. On top of that, the drive to report against sustainable development goals, but also to feed environmental change monitoring, etc., from what was the Department of Environment at the time, were very, very strong drivers for us. So right into the middle of it, Richard Lucas came to me and said, hey, I've got this product which is a land cover idea, and it's based on the Food and Agriculture Organization land cover classification system. And in that, I saw a way that we could provide land cover across Australia, which actually enabled the jurisdictions to basically take it into their own context. So in the past, we would have said how this part of the terrain is forest, that part is shrubland. This is, all these particular definitions that made sense from one perspective, and then discovered that, well, Queensland has a different definition for forest to the National Carbon Accounting Scheme, and there are differences that go back to NVIS and all sorts of, different conflicts in the way that we talk about things. Well, the FAO system basically just says it's vegetated, it has so much cover and so much height. And in doing that, you can say, well, if we just describe it in terms of environmental variables, if we just describe land cover in terms of things we measure rather than concepts that we put around that, then lots more people can actually get involved into the same system. So we've been working on this now for well over 2 years to come up with a national land cover system that's based on Landsat. A lot of people will say, well, why Landsat? The simple answer is that we are primarily trying to address the National Environmental Economic Accounting Program, which is in line with the census years. And if you have a look, that means we're talking about 2015, 2010, than possibly '05 and 2000 going back, and therefore we need to have a data set that can support that, and Landsat is essentially the default answer at that resolution. So that's why we've concentrated very much on Landsat to start with. The thing that we're doing is we're not trying to come up with one single classifier which just takes data in, puts it through machine learning and pops out classes. What we're doing is we're saying, if we want information about the vegetated part of land cover, then we're going to go to the best vegetation land cover data set there is. Right now, we're seeing that as being the fractional cover that comes out of the Joint Remote Sensing Research Program. So when we talk about veg, we're plugging that in. Similarly, we came up with a nice water product a few years ago. When it comes to water in the landscape, we plug that in. And so what we're doing is we're really creating a mashup tool to an international standard rather than trying to come up with a new, one system beats them all. And that's where we see the broader Earth observation community coming in, because as new, really good land cover, specific land cover products are developed, they're applicable to go straight into this system. If we can start pulling out things like vegetation height and structure, as we were talking about in the vegetation workshop a couple of weeks ago, then that would be a fantastic input into this particular system. It would go straight in. Similarly, you could add things in there, the differences in cultivated area and so on. So realistically, for us, this particular set of workshops is fantastic for us to see, one, what's out there, how is it going to fit into what we're doing, and how can we make what we're doing suit the end user even better. So we're really looking for that fit for purpose endpoint. Does that help?
Yeah, no, that helps tremendously, Norman, and actually moves things forward quite quickly. I mean, just to try to summarise across yours and Jane's talk, I mean, there is an almost there sort of new national land cover product. Land use, we've got a long-standing program, but there's definitely a range of ways that could be improved upon. So in terms of getting close to the operational side of things, I think, tomorrow we'll probably come back to listening more about where DEA is going with this and how we can plug in the different components, but also where the states are potentially going with their activities as well, and how those things sit together. I guess this is, I don't want to say it is, so it's slightly less complex than the vegetation workshop in terms of the range of products which are there and which people are looking at producing, because you've really got two main products which are relatively clear. We can have different definitions at state and national. We do seem to have a body in place which is actually able to assess whether it does meet a national standard and it's authoritative as well. So I think what I'll do now is, given we are sort of getting close to time, is I did want to open it up a bit and suggest that if people do want to start to look through the questions and fill out those now, please go ahead and do it. But I do want to open up questions a bit more across the group in terms of particularly state and territory organisations. Are there any primary sort of forward-looking concerns you have in terms of the land use and land cover products that you have to deliver, and is it suitable for you using a national product going down into a state level, particularly for land cover? So I guess I'm keen to hear from some of the states, and then also if there's questions in the chat window as well. Norman, Joel McKechnie's just put a question in there that you might want to have a look at and try and answer. But are there any comments from state agencies about do any of you have specific requirements, for land cover and land use, which are, are going to be quite different to what you've had to deliver before, or is it business as usual?
Stuart, Matt, Miles here from South Australia. I'll have a bit of a crack at that. I guess the one point I wanted to make is that the old ACLUMP program has historically generated two products, if you like. One sort of at a national scale, and the other one that we call sort of catchment scale, which is an aggregate of the jurisdictional efforts from the ground up. And so those two products have been slightly different in methodology and in purpose, in use cases. So the national one was really for national use cases, and the other one was really to propagate this consistent classification scheme to stitch together the state's local mapping and then make that sort of align in a conceptual sense to that national product. And I guess that needs some unpacking to understand the detail of all of that. But I think there's a couple of key points out of that. One is that this approach now of bringing in the Earth observation community that's now springing up around these things is kind of adding an extra engine to those methodologies. And the questions that you're asking are right. How do we make this best align with and inject into those other methodologies? Because arguably those two previous products over the last couple of years, as Jane was alluding to, we've been trying to sort of merge them together into a single sort of methodology output, but we're not quite there yet. So I think this is really useful for it to push that along. That's the first thing. We could spend days talking about that, but we won't. So that's the other part of your question. In terms of the states, each of the states have very different needs and drivers, and in fact, some don't really have them at all. So for those states where they have legislative imperative and existing programs, Queensland obviously, New South are now going that way very heavily, and because they've got it in their legislation, they need it to support the administration of that legislation, then they'll have very set ways that they're going about things. Some of the other states don't, and South Australia is one of those, don't really have any internal desire to put lots of our scarce resources to doing this stuff. So we would benefit from a national product that has some consistency across the country, and is regular and operational, as we say, and is at a fairly local enough scale. So the scale issue, I think, is going to be tricky with landing those products. But I just wanted to make that differentiation. Some states are more interested in this than others. I'll stop there for now, but I've got plenty.
Sure. Just maybe one of those points in terms of this likely scale differences. Are you talking about sort of the minimum mapping unit scale? In South Australia, there'd be a different requirement to Queensland or WA.
Yeah, it's also the use cases. I mean, sometimes 25 metres doesn't really cut it for change, particularly in coastal environments. And so that can be problematic. People might defer to other more local data sets for that. The other issue about scale is really connecting it to the cadastre, and where economic information comes in, or some of those non-Earth observationable, if that's a word, elements come into land use. They're more often attributable to a cadastral parcel. So we have this problem of aligning the cadastre with the pixel, if you like.
Thanks, Matt. That's really helpful, and I think that the different state and territory drivers, we're always going to have to consider those in terms of going forwards. Any other comments from state and territory agencies about differences in requirements, or also along the lines of, it does sound like this is being driven a lot more by specific information and use cases as opposed to changes in sensors, technology, and other areas. But the technological changes are still a consideration down the track. So that's good to see.
Stuart, Dan Tyndall
Yeah,
here.
go ahead, Dan.
Just sort of to further echo Matt's points, I guess. I guess it's that issue that states will do what states will need to do, in a sense. And I think the direction, particularly that Norman's going, and it echoes on the back of Jane's comments, is having these sort of consistent, adaptable classification schemas, not necessarily products. I think we shouldn't get too hung up on products. I think having these schemas that the best available information or the best available processes in the EO sense can feed into is absolutely critical, because it provides that coordination classification schema that we need. And ACLUMP, and particularly ALUM, and where land use has gone historically, is a great example of the success of that kind of concept. I think there's a challenging question in this about what authoritative means and what it means to different jurisdictions. You know, obviously the Commonwealth have needs that are national, international, and in a certain sphere, those are authoritative data sets for those requirements, but they may not be viewed as authoritative in at a state level, because we've got other processes, programs, embedded things going on. So that's a little bit of a challenge about how we set up a bit of a, if you like, governance framework that enables different levels of authoritative to be recognised. Again, I think sometimes those classification schemes actually facilitate that. So you might have authoritative data coming out of a state that can feed up into a national schema that provides the authorisation at the state and federal level. Sometimes it's less successful the other way because of legacy, but that's not to say it's not less successful states feeding up either. Commonwealth have their own needs, and they change with governments, same as states do. So I guess just, yeah, I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned from what Jane summarised, really. And I think the directions that Norman's taking things is very much right up the right avenue. But I guess, you know, it'd be important to leave the door open in that schema and that framework for what is truly best available. And, you know, selfishly speaking, from a state perspective, we could argue that there's certain things, for example, we're overhauling slats at the moment. There'll be things that we could feed upwards that we would say are far more in the realms of best available once we deliver on those things than perhaps anything that might be done continentally, even using algorithms that we all use, because we take those things further at the state level. So it's how you actually build those up into national products, if indeed that's a direction we choose to go. It creates some levels of complexity, but having said that, again, if you've got a schema there to fit and plug those things into, it's not that difficult. In terms of drivers, similar sort of things, accounting frameworks are emerging in Queensland. We of course have our various land cover program drivers there. And I think that's another good thing about the directions that Norman and the guys are taking things, is if, you know, we can influence consistency in the algorithm sitting beneath these products, then you can still argue alignment in terms of authorization. So they're all built on the same foundations, the same image processing, the same algorithms. I think there's a lot of defensibility about that, and it really just comes down to, at the end of the day, how you slice and dice that for your own jurisdictional needs. I'll shut up there. Thanks.
I mean, thanks, Dan. That built on what was said previously quite nicely, and it does go down the line of providing that solution potentially to how is something set up which can be run and then used at different levels or scale. That we started the discussion in the vegetation groups about procedures and algorithms, but got stuck on the authoritative side of things. And I think the way this discussion is going is really helpful in terms of that consistency and algorithms and documenting how it's done. And I think that does lead into partly the approach that Matt Adams has put in there. And Matthew, I'm sorry I didn't get you to introduce yourself before. Do you want to just do that briefly now? Oh, may not be online. All right. I think everyone can see Matt's comment there. Yeah, and the idea of that nested approach. But if you do connect up with audio, Matt, let us know. All right. So just being mindful of time, and I know we're letting people talk more than fill out the form, but that's partly the idea of having some of these shorter sessions. From I guess a research end side of this, if you want, are there other, I think, developments that are really starting to change how we do land use, land cover mapping? Jane alluded to several of them before in terms of some of the approaches which can be used for improving algorithms, and we're seeing, you know, a lot of different, I'm not sure at a Commonwealth level, but across multiple state and territory agencies, people trying to get a good handle on machine learning, different approaches to artificial intelligence, to particularly help with land cover and land use mapping. Is that something we need to look at collectively here to say, is there a way of developing best practice in that from an Australian sort of point of view, particularly for local, state and national applications? Or is it a technology change with the availability of higher spatial resolution imagery and large area repeat aerial photography? Are there any specific research drivers that we should be being really cognizant of? And if there's not today, we can identify it later on. Just while people are thinking, that the technology change was a big driver in the vegetation area, particularly in terms of bringing in information from more active systems that provide more detail on structural properties of vegetation, whereas that was something that hasn't been done a lot with optical or passive systems, and there was a need to develop more capability for being able to extract structural metrics or measurements. So there was the shift to having access to more imaging radar and LiDAR data sets was identified as a key driver. I don't know if your advent of more higher spatial resolution imagery, whether it's Planet, Earth Eye, or whoever is providing it, is that something that we need to look at more carefully here? So, and if we don't know the answer now, that's fine. You can go into the survey questions as well. Right.
Stuart, it's Matt here again.
Yeah, Matt,
I've got a quick minute. The one that comes to mind for me from our experiences in recent land cover work for South Australia is the rotational cropping and grazing systems. It's really hard to pick apart what cropping and grazing from and the regularity of that. Can you pick up a signal that tells you the regularity in that? And some of the marginal country for us you know, we're getting rotations where there's more grazing and less cropping going on, and with climate change. And so for us, it's really hard to pull that out from an Earth observation point of view, and then breaking it down even further for the grazing on natives or exotics, grasslands really. So for us, that I think is an area, and I'd be happy to, you know, stand corrected if all this research is out there, but I think that's an area where we could improve our understanding, and it kind of crosses over the veg topic here, but it feeds through to the land use, where you're saying what activity is going on as opposed to what is there. So I think that's one possible area that we could look at to improve.
Thanks, Matt. I mean, that's the sort of thing, yeah, I was hoping someone would come up with. Part of the reason for running these workshops and some of the thinking that was initially behind Earth Observation for Government Network was that, yes, this links the research applications through to relevant government applications, but it can also help us drive the direction that the research is going, given that, you know, the majority of people working in our area do need to have a drive towards applied work and work that has an impact. And, you know, adoption and use in government activities is a major impact for their work. So that's partly why we're pushing the research side of this, in terms of not just, can we get research projects for it, but can we get people to start, you know, systematically focusing on the new data sets, you know, the new techniques, or critical problems like, you know, separating that rotational cropping and grazing that Matt just mentioned, because, you know, if they do come up with a solution, or at least evaluate options, it leads through straight away to it being used. So that's part of the reason we're trying to get these transition plans in place, so that our research communities work more effectively across the government communities as well. All right, I'm just going to switch back briefly to that form online and start to wrap things up for today. So if you are able to take half an hour to go through this before the next session tomorrow, that would be extremely helpful. Doesn't have to be today, could be tomorrow. If there are other people in your organisation that you think would be in a better position to fill this out, you know, please forward it on to them. You know, it is about trying to identify, you know, those land cover and land use products and services that we can be pushed up into that operational level. But it's also about unmet demand or problems with land cover and land use information. And it could be, as Dan alluded to, primarily about the process, you know, for delivering land use and land cover, that there are, we set that up in a way that it works across multiple jurisdictions. The question of what's operational and authoritative, we do want to find out what your thoughts on that are, again, because it's quite an important consideration. And, you know, it may be that we already have a way of establishing authoritative approaches here that people can use. And then the last one, that again, the calibration validation, and Jane mentioned that in terms of the work that was going on at UNE, engaging with industry, and particularly, you know, where you want industry to understand what's being done and to use the products and services that the government's producing. It's a really, you know, critical component, you know, to engage with them. And, you know, the UNE groups come up with some interesting ways of doing that actually work, and that, you know, they have used to refine the multiple national versions of commodity level mapping. So it's something to consider, that's changing and could help improve mapping across, you know, different land use types. So, all right, what I'll do now is I just stop sharing that and just bring things to a close. So thanks everybody for your time today. What we will do is email you essentially a summary of today along with some links, including the link to the form that you looked at before, but also to the supporting material, which is in a participants folder. So you'll be able to see the national assessment report that was done last year, some of the small scale survey responses, and the database that was produced last year showing the different applications that were at research, sort of national implementation research stage, and operational that we're aiming to update as well. So we'll send that through in a summary email. Right, so I'll just finish off on that for today. And again, thank everybody for your time. I know this was short notice, but we've gone through things quite quickly and worked them out. The next session is going to be tomorrow afternoon, and that will really focus sort of on how do we, I guess, start to implement the process of going from research to operations. And I think it is going to focus on particularly that land cover product from Digital Earth Australia, and also what's going on at state and territory level and how those things sit together. Thanks everybody for your time this afternoon, and we look forward to seeing some of you tomorrow, and also some of you next week when we start to look at the research side of this and what needs to be followed on as well. So with that, I'll say thanks everybody, and I look forward to seeing you over the next couple of days. And thanks again, Larissa, for setting this up.